What is the difference between an atheist and agnostic? The issue is that many people who identify as atheists claim that an agnostic is simply a variation of an atheist. In general, they describe atheism as a position that lacks beliefs. In other words, a person who does not hold beliefs about claims for which there is no evidence is labeled an atheist. According to this view, an agnostic is merely certain variation of atheism, a person who is less confident in their position but still falls on the atheist side. In reality, this is fundamentally incorrect understanding of both atheism and agnosticism. Atheism is not simply the rejection of beliefs. Rather, atheism is a belief in a particular worldview. It is the belief that God does not exist, and this belief implies a certain model of reality and the structure of the universe. In other words, atheism offers a specific worldview. Therefore, the atheist position is not merely the absence of beliefs. It is the exception of materialistic view of reality as true. As for agnosticism, it is actually a state of uncertainty in which a person is not convinced that either position is true. Agnostic is not certain which worldview reflects reality. Therefore, agnosticism is not a form of atheism. An agnostic stands between the theist and the atheist. At the same time, it is important to understand that a perfectly neutral position does not truly exist. In a certain sense, everyone is agnostic to some degree. No one is absolutely certain about every aspect of their worldview. Therefore, an agnostic is someone who is uncertain about fundamental questions concerning what is true. One example of such a question is whether God exists. If a person says, "I'm not sure whether God exists or not," God may exist or God may not exist, that person is an agnostic. If a person is convinced that God does not exist, that is the atheist position. If a person is convinced that God exists, that is the theist position. It is also possible for someone to be an agnostic who leans towards atheism or towards theism. A person may not be certain that God does not exist, yet may lean towards the view that God does not exist. This would be an agnostic leaning towards atheism. Likewise, a person may not be certain that God exists, yet may lean towards the belief that God does exist. This would be an agnostic leaning towards theism. There are many misconceptions on the internet regarding atheism, agnosticism, and theism. In reality, the worldview upon which a person builds their understanding of reality influences their views on many fundamental issues, such as the nature of the universe, morality, the meaning of life, and many others. The atheist position is not simply rejection of beliefs. It is a materialistic perspective on fundamental questions. It is the belief that God does not exist and that reality is therefore entirely material in nature. Theism, on the other hand, is the belief that God exists and that beyond the material world there is also a spiritual reality. Agnosticism is the position of someone who is not convinced by either the atheist or the theist perspective. For this reason, it would be beneficial if these concepts were not so frequently confused with one another, as a clear understanding of their differences allows for deeper and more meaningful discussions. If you are interested in philosophical questions, subscribe to channel and let us explore the truth together.